What has been your worst experience flying in a plane? I was on a small commuter plane, think about 20 seats. Single file the length of the cabin. And we hit a wind rotor, I think that's what it's called, off the mountains. It felt like a giant baby grabbed the plane and shook it like a rattle. Hands down the worst turbulence I've ever felt. Other than that, my trips have been rather uneventful. Sometimes I laugh inappropriately when I get scared. We had turbulence once where the plane felt like it was sliding side to side. People were puking and I was sitting there giggling like a jerk. Turbulence so bad, just before landing in Algeria, that the flight attendants screamed in horror. They do this for a living. So naturally, I shat my pants. Flying advice from my dad has always been, you'll know you're screwed if the cabin crew look scared. I had a lot of ear problems as a kid that required multiple surgeries. I figured out on my first flight at age 19 that my ears could still bother me when the worst ear pain of my life hit me during the descent. Since then I figured out how to make them pop, making it less of an issue. But I was unprepared that first time and spent quite a bit of time holding back tears until my ears popped on their own a few minutes after landing. Not my story, but one from my father. He was flying in Russia and there was a terrible storm during the flight and obvious it caused extreme turbulence. Then the captain turned on the PA system and told everyone, "This is Captain Besmertny speaking. We are passing through some light turbulence, so please fasten your seat belts," in the most monotonous voice possible. Just to note, the name Besmertny translates in Russian to undying. Also, a lightning strike hit the wing, which was pretty scary. Getting food poisoning 6 minutes before landing and experiencing the landing on the toilet. 12-hour flight. Middle aisle on a 747. The seat recliner was broken. The guy next to me took his shoes off and his feet stank. The woman to my left spilled orange juice on me. And the headphone plug for the in-flight entertainment was broken. I did get extra potato chips as a compensation for the seat problem, though. You should have complained about the broken plug. One time my entire screen was broken and they moved me to first class for a transatlantic flight. It was incredible except for the fact that they forgot to feed me, but I'll take it. I unknowingly had a sinus infection when flying from Greece to Italy. Thought I just felt terrible from a hangover. About 20 minutes into the flight my eardrum starts bursting and leaking fluid. It was some of the worst pain I've ever felt. The pressure subsided a bit once we landed in Rome, but I had almost 100% hearing loss in that ear until the swelling went down 4 days later. I chug Sudafed like crazy now if I feel any sort of congestion prior to flying. My first flight ever. Immediately after landing, a woman who was clearly intoxicated screaming about how she needed to get her dog off the storage under the plane. She started pushing people out of the way and engaged in a physical altercation with another flyer. Needless to say, she was arrested. As if the 3-hour flight wasn't enough time on the plane. We had to wait for all this to go down prior to exiting. Flying home to Australia. There's some European family whose daytime is apparently our nighttime. Bored kids run endless up and down the aisles, making sleep impossible. Cabin staff were useless. While in transit, a kid produces a green laser and waves it around. Unsure if it was powerful enough to blind. But idiot parents don't tell him off. I just walked away. Had enough bulls peep. Thankfully their connecting flight was not the same. Slept for maybe 2 hours before arriving to attend my mother's funeral. Child screaming her lungs out in the seat behind us for the last 40 minutes of a 10-hour flight because she didn't want to put her seat belt on for the descent, and her useless father telling her stop screaming 100 times, then arguing with the flight attendants by saying, "Look at her. She doesn't want to put the seat belt on. There's nothing I can do." The saving grace was one very sassy male flight attendant who would walk by every 2 minutes and just say be the parent to the father and then continue walking. It was hilarious. We were flying from Florida to London when one of the engines caught fire somewhere out over the Atlantic. So had to turn back and land at New York. The engine on the replacement plane also caught fire. So the pilot had to turn back and land at New York. We didn't chance it with the third plane and went with a different carrier. I was 8 years old at the time and for some strange reason, I'd never had a nightmare before then. My first nightmare was on the third plane back, and involved a Mickey Mouse in a glass coffin and an emaciated green version of Thing from the Addams Family. About 6 years ago I was sitting on the plane and I suddenly felt a tickle in my throat. It just wouldn't go away. I'd cough and cough and cough. Nothing. The only thing that helped was ice chips. But even then I couldn't stop, it was miserable. That night I woke up in the middle of the night with 2 swollen eyes, swollen lips, hives all over my body, hot joints, and a tight chest. I was having some severe allergic reaction to something. Which means that on the plane my throat was closing and I just didn't know. Of course the ice chips helped because they were keeping the swelling down. What's weird is that has never happened before or since then, and I'm not allergic to anything that I know of. Flying solo. Got seated next to someone with horrendous BO. Longest 4 hours of my life. After being seated behind a man who was eating something vile smelling. Maybe it was pickled asparagus. I bring a small jar of Vicks Vapor Rub in my carry-on and smear a tab on my upper lip to ward off offending smells mid-flight. This will pale in comparison to others. But I was seated between 2 morbidly obese people on a fully booked flight once and I have claustrophobia issues. I'm pretty broad-shouldered, so I was literally wedged in. It was a 2-hour flight of me silently freaking out and being the most uncomfortable I've ever been. Seated between 2 morbidly obese people. When I did the Tower of Terror at Disney World, I was on my own wimpy family, but I was quite happy. I wasn't really paying attention when we all sat down and the safety bar came down in front of me. Well, actually 15 ahead of me. I looked along the row and there were 2 enormous people. Safe and snug. In the photo they took I look 7 feet tall because my bottom was up in the air. We were flying on a night flight from Germany to New York. And the flight couldn't have gone any better. We were descending into JFK nighttime and the back wheels touch ground. Then the nose and everyone started clapping. Then 2 seconds you just hear the engines go full throttle and we took right off. You can see the terror and panic in people's faces. I was with my cousin who suffers from panic attacks as is. So this triggered it instantly. The flight attendants didn't seem to have any idea either. I immediately thought it was being hijacked. We flew around in circles for 10 minutes before the pilot came on the PA and pretty much said, "Our apologies about that. We were landing on a takeoff runway." I think about what could have happened very often as I fly pretty frequently. I had that happen once. Almost touching down at LAX when all of a sudden engines are at full throttle and we are climbing nearly straight up. We fly back out over the ocean and make a wide turn back to the airport. Captain came on the intercom and calmly said, "Sorry about that, folks. Somebody decided to share the runway with us. Stay buckled in and we'll be landing soon." I thanked him on my way out. 20,000 feet, the O2 masks come down. Long silence from the crew. Finally, the pilot comes on and says lots of electrical systems are out and we're landing at a small airport in 9 minutes. The descent was on full air brakes, which made the flight loud and shaking, with kids screaming because their ears were hurting. Parents screaming at their kids to blow while holding their noses. Adult behind us slapping his thighs shouting endlessly, "Oh no. No. But we got an 8 voucher for lunch at the airport while we waited for a new plane. I was seated next to a woman with an emotional support animal. If I had to guess, it was a pug chihuahua mix. Whatever it was small enough for her to keep on her lap. Apparently, the dog needed its own emotionally support animal because it was a wreck. It kept standing up, whining, and the mofo shyt on her lap and would leak piss anytime someone walked by. The smell